This is Team Talk with Rep. This is where we update you on how your student representatives are working to advocate on your behalf to Mount Royal University and to all three levels of government, as well as to the public and the media. I'm joined by Spirit River Stripewolf, President of the SAMRU Representation Executive Council, and I'm Joseph Nguyen, Vice President of Student Affairs. Today we're chatting with Lee Easton, President of MRFA, also known as Mount Royal Faculty Association.
Yeah, in this interview we'll be chatting about what the MRFA is.
Then we'll be talking about what a collective agreement is and what is the collective bargaining process.
Then we'll be chatting about the strike that nearly happened.
And finally, we will discuss future steps on how to mitigate stress for students in future potential strikes.
So thank you, Lee, for joining us here for this podcast session. Do you want to say a few things about yourself as faculty and the MRFA president?
Sure. Thanks, Spirit River. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks for this opportunity to come and chat with you and everybody who's listening. So my name is Lee Easton. I'm the current president of the Mount Royal Faculty Association. I use the pronouns he and him. And when I'm not president, I am a tenured member of the Department of English Languages and Cultures. I teach courses related to film studies, adaptation, comic studies, so I do a comics as literature course, a graphic novel course, and I also teach in general education, 1404 usually, writing about images, a course that's really closely aligned with the other things that I just was mentioning. So been at Mount Royal for almost 26 years, so here from the time before the time, and have been involved with collective bargaining actually from 2000 till 2020, and not every round, but most rounds I've been involved in some way, so I have a lot of experience.
So as the president of the MRFA, could you help our viewers, because me and Spirit, we know what the MRFA is because we're part of the work, but lots of our viewers, they're not too exposed to it. So what exactly is MRFA and how does it affect students?
So the Mount Royal Faculty Association is the association that has been by legislation created to represent faculty in their relationships to their employer, the Mount Royal University Board of Governors. But we're much more than that. We're a professional association. So what we also do is we have social events. We have an extensive professional development program that we run every year. We have an advocacy committee, so certainly I know that our advocacy committee has linked up with SAMRU on issues. We think it's really important that we are able to speak as faculty to issues, particularly around post-secondary education. And last few years, we've been focusing a lot on funding and some of the changes that we've seen happen at the provincial level. We celebrate our members' achievements. So every year we hold an event where those who have achieved tenure or been promoted or become permanent members of the staff, we celebrate them. We have retirement for our colleagues who leave. So we're really quite an encompassing kind of organization. I mean, in many ways, we're not that different from SAMRU, right? In the sense that, we have this one sort of official function representing people, our members at the table, or, if there's a problem with the collective agreement, if I feel like, you just haven't done that the way we agreed to do it, then there's grievances, right? So we also represent people in grievances as well. But as I say, it's important to see that full range of other things that we do with and for our members. And we also have a faculty center up on the third floor. So,
well, I think that's really important because I know when there was the potential strike that might have happened and the potential lockout, and all of those things, I know students really care about their faculty, and it really made me realize that for them, they don't interact as much with maybe SAMRU, maybe for the food court. They don't know the work that Joseph and I are doing in the background. And so, I think it's really important that students know, and how this helps students is how the faculty needs to be taken care of as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I will say one of the things that we as an association, we really have valued, I think, over the years, our working relationship with SAMRU. We think that often students and faculty, we spend a lot of time together, and we have a lot of things in common, right? Yeah. And I know my last 2 years working with Spare River, and then this year with you, Joseph, and the others in your executive, it's been really exciting to see the places where we come together and our interests meet up, right? Mm-hmm. And we're able to work together.
Yeah. Okay. Just before we get into the spicy stuff, in a nutshell, what is the collective agreement and what is the collective bargaining process like?
So the collective agreement is a legal binding document between the Faculty Association and its members and the Board of Governors of Mount Royal University, and it's administered by the administration in the university. So in our case, a lot of folks we deal with are in the academic affairs, so deans, the provost, the chairs. The chairs are members of the association as well. So the collective agreement just outlines the terms and conditions of our employment, right? So it really outlines everything from wages, obviously, to benefits, to our tenure and promotion system is all laid out in the collective agreement. I mentioned teaching evaluations. There's other sort of pieces to all this, like how do we go about hiring new faculty, right? Mm-hmm. How do we reappoint existing contract faculty? All of these things are laid out in the collective agreement, and they're bargained, right? So that we both agree on how we're going to go about and do these things. Yeah. Typically, a contract is got a set amount of time. Historically, we have usually had 2-year contracts, but this agreement, we'll get to that, is a little bit different. It's a 4-year agreement, which is one of the longer ones that we have had at Mount Royal. But that process of collective bargaining is that both sides come together. We appoint some faculty members who want to take on that role to represent us in bargaining, and then the administration does the same thing. We try to keep it fairly small, so we have about 5 members on our team, and there's usually 4 from admin. So you've got about 9 people, 8 or 9 people who are coming together. Bargaining, there's a set process again, so it starts generally in February, and then is supposed to conclude, and again, didn't this time. If it goes well, we have a new collective agreement in June. Both parties sign off on it. We go away. We leave it alone. We come back and we revisit it in 2 years.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to bring up was about the Board of Governors, because I was really curious, because Joseph and I both sit as student representatives on the MRE Board of Governors. So we have a vote in terms of tuition increases and everything like that. Don't worry, students, we voted against tuition increases. But one thing that I was really curious about was to what extent is the board participating in that bargaining process? And so one thing, okay, so
that's a good question.
Folks can't see, but Lee had a grimace on his face. One thing, and I was talking to some of the folks, the governance folks on the board and so forth, and one thing I was told was that, and I think this is something really important for students to know, is that, we're talking about HR related stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that and SAMRU historically has had a position on is we don't get involved in the HR stuff of faculty, right? We don't want to get involved with, things like salaries or anything like that. And we also have that relationship, I think students in this province with faculty that, you folks don't talk about tuition and we don't talk about salaries in our advocacy, which I think is really important. But the other thing too is that the Board of Governors aren't privy to a lot of that HR information. That it's maintained in the Human Resources Committee, subcommittee, and they kind of are delegated that authority by the Mount Royal Board of Governors. And so I was kind of surprised. It's okay, so I don't have to vote on anything. I don't have to. In a way, it was kind of nice because we kind of got an easy way out of not having to, have to vote on something that's an HR matter, and nor do I think we should be given that ability to do so. But I want to just kind of point that part out because that was an interesting thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unlike, it's not completely parallel, but we have our bargaining team, they have their bargaining team.
Yeah.
the board has its HRT committee, subcommittee, as you mentioned. We have an executive board, and then we have our membership, right?
Yeah.
When I've bargained, I've said, well, one of the differences between the board's team and our team is they have to go and report to 10 people. We have to go and report to 800.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it just is not its magnitude, but it's also the fact that people interact with us, differently than, if you call a meeting and you've got the 8 people there. Well, that's a different thing than if you have to get, 500 people together or 300 or whatever the number is that will come, right? So, but it is kind of parallel in that sense. And where it does fall apart is that we have our members review all the proposed changes in a settlement, and then they get to vote on it. And so that's what we did last week, right? We did do our ratification vote, and that was when the members had approved that. We then were able to say to the Board of Governors team, yeah, we're ready, we can sign off. And so we'll be doing that hopefully by the end of March.
On that same topic, so you talked a little bit about like the MRFA has its bargaining team.
Mm-hmm.
What's your role as the MRFA president? Do you play a significant role in the bargaining process?
Yes and no. I'm not at the table. The president is the leader of the executive board, and the executive board is involved with mapping out and organizing any kind of communication, any kind of member engagement, and ultimately responsible for any kind of strike and or other forms of job action. So my role there was really a big part of it was coordinating the different groups that we had moving forward towards job action. But I do sit ex officio on all committees, including bargaining.
Yeah.
So I would from time to time be given updates about where things might be. Of course, our executive board is also updated as well. So my role as president really is the spokesperson for the association, and also overseeing the ongoing effort towards mobilizing for job action if we need to, and of course just occasionally being updated by the team. So we do have a bit of a division in terms of the folks at the table are there to get the deal, and then we're here to help them get the deal. And as you've no doubt heard me say many times, we, I think as faculty, had very little interest in being on strike, but we were willing to go on strike in order to get a fair deal. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Nobody wants to leave their job, stop getting money, be out on a picket line in the middle of the winter. You can't always count on a nice Chinook wind.
Yeah.
So it's a big decision, but sometimes it's the only way to get your employer to realize you have some needs or interests or demands, you choose your word, that have to be addressed.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. I do have a quick side question, if that's okay. You mentioned that collective agreements get revised every 2 years or revisited every 2 years, right?
You decide as part of your bargaining, you decide how long you want the agreement to last. So some folks, like I think the ATA, they had like a huge one, right? Like many, many years. You could do a 1-year agreement. The very first time I bargained, we did a 1-year agreement, which literally meant we signed in November and we went back in January.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was pretty intense. That was pretty intense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's typically we've done 2-year agreements here. This one is a 4-year agreement. But it's the start date, and it's going to sound very weird. The start date is June 30th, 2020. So it's a 4-year agreement, but effectively it's got 2 more years before we have to go back.
Is there any retroactive action that occurs because of that?
If there are wage settlements in an agreement like this if there were like a wage settlement that was retroactive. So, for example, when the United Nurses of Alberta settled, they had some agreements to add to their grids, so they would have got retroactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, we don't have anything that is in that way, and we did actually have to talk a little bit about what about the language changes. I mentioned we had something, I think we had 56 different language changes, and some of those, it was like, well, what do we do now? Because we've agreed to that. What about, do we go retrospectively? And we had some conversations a bit about that. So it's a little tricky. Like, that's one of the reasons you don't want to go that long in bargaining, right? Because the longer out you go, the weirder it gets, quite literally, in terms of what do you do with all that stuff that's happened now, and you have to revisit it. So it's never a good idea to go too long.
I see.
Without a contract.
So if it's subjective, like it depends on if like revisiting is like subjective on which university does which. How come? I'm not sure if you know. So if you don't know the answer, it's okay. But how come this year lots of different universities like U of A and U of L, they've all done collective agreements revisits at the same time? Is that like coincidental?
This could go a little longer because no, it's not coincidental.
Oh,
here's what happened. So in 2018, the then NDP government decided that they wanted to go with a coordinated approach to bargaining across the public service. And so one of the things they wanted was they wanted all the contracts to end at the same time.
Oh, I see.
And believe me, no one was happy about that prospect because we were not convinced, I think many of us, that we would have the same government when our contracts came up for renewal. And turned out we were right. And again, I think we're going to be in a situation where we're going to see all those contracts again expire at the same time. Well, it was a bad thing at one point, but frankly, it's not a bad thing from a labor perspective, right? If you're going to have all those contracts go at one time, well, you got to be ready for what can happen, right? Yeah. So I think we realize that now. Yeah. I don't, at the time when we heard the mandates and we're going, oh no. but there are some, so you pointed out, Joseph, that's right. I mean, Lethbridge, us, U of A,
they're all
U of C. The only one that's I think a little bit different, maybe Athabasca, but they're moving fast now too, right? So, but really, it's not a good. I mean, it is what it is, but it is very much a government kind of approach. And again, as I know we'll talk a bit about, but when governments start to play in the background and start to influence things indirectly or in some cases more directly, it really does hamper what we would call free collective bargaining. It's not really free. I mean, it's kind of free collective bargaining, I guess is what I'd call it. Yeah. So that started with the NDP government.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the strike. The strike nearly happened. We heard that the negotiations moved to formal mediation, which involved a government-appointed mediator to assist those negotiations. And then right at the last minute, the MRFA and MRU Board of Governors reached a deal. So what caused it and what prevented it?
Well, I think when you get to the point we were at, and even if we were proceeding further, and had we not got that moment, we would likely be looking at calling a strike vote. Yeah. And you got to remember, when we get into this phase of negotiations, it's always going to seem like the last minute. So the last time that the Mount Royal Faculty Association called a strike, had a strike vote, had an overwhelming mandate, over 90%. That was in 2003. And we were at the table on a Friday evening, and rotating strikes were scheduled for Monday morning. Mm. And much the same. At the last moment, we settled. I was the chief negotiator for that round. And, I know exactly how that happened. It was 10 o'clock at night, and we found ourselves, sort of with a deal. So how did it happen this time? I wasn't in the room. I don't know. I can tell you, though, that what brought us there was was the fact that nothing else had worked, right? And so when you apply, so you can do what you want. You can do what you want to get an agreement, right? Like in our case, we went to informal mediation and that was helpful. We got a couple things resolved. But ultimately, if you cannot get where you need to go, you must start working under the labor code. And the labor code says that you have to, before you can call a strike vote, before you can go on strike or have a lockout. So we just call those work stoppages, right? That's a neutral way to talk about it. So it doesn't say who's doing what. Before you can have a work stoppage, you have to go to a formal mediation process. Those formal mediation processes usually are quite short. They're 2 days and they're paid for by the government because they really do want you to get some agreement, right? We went to formal mediation, but and our mediation process was different because we did our 2 days and then it was like, oh no, we think you should stay around and do a bit more. Yeah. And that was a surprise. And we said, okay, because we wanted an agreement, right? Yeah. So and then we continued to the request for additional time to try to figure some things out. And then quite literally, we were told by our bargaining team that they had found a way through. And, when you look at the agreement, you can see where some of the compromises were. We did not address full-time faculty workload this round, but we have a process to look at that. We did not address our contract faculty's desire and rightful, I would say, demand to have pathways to permanent employment. We did not really deal with, in a way, our cost of living issues. But I think that both teams were looking at it and they were seeing what was happening around the province, both in the larger, broader public sector, and looking at I've mentioned the United Nurses of Alberta agreement, which you'll remember they were in mediation. It seemed like forever, and it was like, what are they talking about? But they were talking about something because they were in mediation. And so I think it was like our mediation process looked a little bit like the nurses, and maybe that's not a big surprise because the same mediator who helped them helped us. So maybe that's just how he does things. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. But
get you both exhausted and
maybe that's how he works. I don't know. I'm not at the table, but I will say it looked a lot the same and it was the same person. So there you go. So I think what brought us there was we weren't able to resolve it, right? I will say, and I know Spirit River has heard me on this, Joseph, you like me too at times. The fact is that we had a government that had imposed a mandate. As I mentioned, mandates aren't necessarily new, but there was much more flexibility around them. Yeah. This government gave mandates that gave them no flexibility at all. So that's where you move from, kind of free collective bargaining, to my mind, where you actually have another party in the room. And I know Minister Nicolaides says that they leave it to day. I've seen his statements. And I would say, yes, Minister, that is true. You are not in the room just the same way I'm not in the room. But, what he has, and it's not even him, what the Treasury Board had said is what happens. And they were the ones who put who made the mandates so restrictive.
Yeah. There's this, I'm just looking at my phone here for that act because I felt like almost like a private investigator or something, like trying to figure out how this all worked. And I was really grateful that you and your team gave us that opportunity to learn a bit about collective bargaining from the MRFA. I think it was called the Public Employer Service Act. Yeah, Public Sector Employers Act. And it says that the minister can issue directives that an employer must follow before, during, and after engaging in collective bargaining. Those directives can involve what MRU can propose or agree to, as well as fiscal limits during the bargaining process. And any directive given from the minister to MRU must be kept confidential. Yeah. And so hearing a little bit about that, seeing some comparisons even with Concordia and like how they didn't have those mandates as well, or they didn't have them because they're private, right? And we're a publicly funded institution. I just thought that whole process was interesting and also kind of sus. That's the best word to use.
Well, totally. And, I think it's something that, and I want to thank again the Students Association taking a principled stand on, the way that this government's particular policies and its way of interfering, I would say, with bargaining, and so appreciated by faculty that
Thank you.
that you were able to take a principled stand speaking to an issue that we both share, right?
Yeah.
We've talked lots as collectively about the impact of cuts.
Yeah.
But I did want to make certain I mentioned that, and to all the students that are listening, thank you for that support. It's so important, and thank you. I just will say, but you're right. I mean, you can imagine what's happening at Lethbridge, right? I mean, you read exactly what could be shaping what's happening down there, right?
Yeah.
They've been told something, and there's no room to move. And if you're going to bargain, you have to have room to move. Now, our team and their board's team did find some things that were outside of the mandate that they could agree on. So we did a lot of work on equity, diversity, and inclusion measures in our collective agreement. We've done a number of things around contract hiring, so seniority. All of those were outside of the mandate, so we were able to make some progress on those, right? But ultimately, on the big things, we had that problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. We'll move on to our last topic. Our last topic is future steps. So moving forward, as you know, students were highly stressed during the whole process, and not just MRU students. Like it's because the student world is like in chaos.
Yeah.
What could be done in the future to mitigate the stress and uncertainty? Like maybe like a pre Q&A, or it's just because
we knew in thinking about the impact of a work stoppage on students that we would need to find ways to communicate with them. I don't think I think we've learned a lot more about how to do that. One thing that we have done all along is provide on our MRFA.net website. We do have a FAQs for students. I think we could do more around that. We would prefer to have very clear talking points for students, and I think one of the things that we realized is that we got to provide all our members, all the faculty, with really clear talking points, because we want our members to convey accurate information, and if they don't know, maybe don't say anything, because if you say the wrong thing, that can provoke all kinds of misinformation that among students can fly really fast, right? So I think we will be looking at, as we look back on this moment, we're going to try to figure out some other ways to communicate with our with students, and making certain that we're getting those talking points out to members, so that we have a consistent line. I think good information, consistent information. Mm-hmm. One thing I think SAMRU and the association agreed with, though, is that there was information, like some of the students' questions are operational.
Yeah.
SAMRU doesn't know what to say. We're not the employer, so we don't know what to say. So will Blackboard be shut down? We don't know.
Yeah.
Who can
Email
tell you?
access.
You have to go and talk to admin. They know. Will we lose the school year? Well, we can't say for sure, but that's a decision that the management will have to make, because they're the ones who ostensibly are holding out, and they'll have to decide how we're going to make it up, right? So. In Ontario, where there have been several strikes at the college system level, typically they find ways to consolidate the academic year and figure out a way to get students through so they don't lose their year. But again, it's stressful. So what else could we do? Better communication for sure.
Yeah. Consistent
Communication. Really, I think one of the things both parties can do, and I think the coalition could do the work on this, is really press the university to provide clear information to students on the contingency basis.
Yeah.
And I know you were, as an association, asking for that, and had we gone further, we would have joined you in that, right? Because
and I think
our members need to know too. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so one thing in our blog post that I mentioned is that we were able to collect, I think, over 800 questions and comments, mostly questions from students about what happens when this happens with Blackboard, with counseling, with all these different kind of services that are provided to them and so forth. And, refunds were a big one. So one thing that I'm hoping to do is to get that information. And I've already talked to Tim Raleigh about it. I'm hoping to talk to them more about it, to already have that posted on their website, already have it ready and be like, this was the situation in 2022. This is what might have happened and this is what we would have done. Because we don't want to have to say that, for example, every case is going to be the same because we don't know what's on the table and so forth in the next, but to at least have some of that contingency planning as well there. Okay, perfect. I think you answered all of the questions that we wanted to ask you about, especially around communication. And I know SAMRU, where one thing I was in another interview recently and we're talking about like students calling in and asking about how SAMRU communicates to its students and what does SAMRU even do for me anyways? And I think, just like as you were saying, Joseph, that the student world has been in chaos for 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I don't think any student association across the province, any of the colleagues that I have at the other student associations, were prepared for this kind of, situation with tuition increases and potential faculty strikes, cuts to post-secondary funding, and then COVID, and then transitioning back and forth to in-person online.
It's like crisis management.
Yeah.
Job description.
The students, I think, right now are just burnt out. Just absolutely burnt out. But this was not something that I think any institution was prepared to undergo. But hey, we made it. Collective agreements.
We have it
done,
signed, ratified. So we're just gotta make all the changes so we can sign off. And I just want to thank both of you for the opportunity to talk about this. I think the more opportunities we have to talk and exchange views, it's better, right? And hopefully can build those kinds of relationships. So when we find ourselves in other tough times, we can look back and know that we built some.
Yeah, and I think that's important to also mention is that SAMRU in our strategic plan for I think multiple years has always talked about positive relationships with faculty and with the administration between the SAMRU rec team and the faculty and so forth. So that's something I think SAMRU just inherently believes in. But I'm glad that that's helped create stronger relationships between SAMRU and the MRFA. So
For sure.
Thanks so much, Lee, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And let's dive into some quick updates we have for our student body. Joseph, what do you have for us?
Well, the first advocacy update we have is on sexual violence prevention. Externally, Rachel, our VPX, participated in a press conference at SAIT with the Alberta Minister of Advanced Education. Minister Nicolaides announced funding and policy direction to tackle the issue of sexual violence on Alberta's post-secondary campuses. The announced changes came directly from the advocacy work SAMRU has done since 2018. Internally, I asked MRU's EDSA, Executive Director of Student Affairs, Chris Rogerson, to update students on what MRU's senior administration has done with SAMRU's 2021 report on dating, domestic, and sexual violence recommendations on campus. In response, Chris said that a sexual violence working group is currently in the works. Your rec team will ensure that students have a voice on this task force.
The next thing we have is about budget advocacy. So the second advocacy update is around the provincial budget. SAMRU VP Rachel Timmermans and myself went to Edmonton during budget week to work alongside our friends at the Alberta Student Executive Council, who represent colleges and polytechnic schools, as well as the Alberta Graduates Provincial Advocacy Council, who represent graduate students in Alberta. We were happy to see policy reforms for campus sexual violence, $5 million to increase training opportunities for Indigenous people, $15 million in grants and bursaries for low-income students studying in qualified high-demand programs, $8 million to expand reskilling and upskilling, and foundational learning supports increases by 3.3%, and institutional operating funding increases of 3.8%. However, despite this, we continue to remain concerned that institutions are forecast to cover 50% of PSI or post-secondary institutional operating expenses in this academic year. And by 2024 to 2025, this will rise to 55%, which means that institutions will be having to pay for a majority of the institutional costs.
Wow.
We believe in public education, and we believe that means our institution should be majority funded by the public.
Next, we have an update on security services. I met with MRU's new manager of security services to discuss their vision on how security can better meet student needs and expectations. I focused on how security services could build trust with the MRU student body. I also advocated that security services needs to offer mental health support to students, especially during exam season. On other news, Rachel and Spirit met with Courtney Walcott, the Calgary City Councillor for MRU's ward. They discussed ways to improve transit to MRU and ways of influencing the development of lands around campus to enhance the student experience.
Well, those are some of the big updates we have for you today. You can go to samru.ca and go to our blog to learn more about the different things we've been up to, the different politicians we've talked to. But this is actually the last tea and talk with Rec for this academic year. And like I said at the beginning, thank you so much for joining us for this academic year. We did this over Instagram. That was the first idea for this. And then we moved to kind of a talk show, which was really fun.
That was fun.
I really liked that. And then we finally moved here to a podcast style. So hopefully those that are maybe commuting can listen to them in their car and learn more about their Students Association. So the last thing I wanted to do before we end off is, out of all of the advocacy that we've done this year, Joseph, what was some of the highlights that you found this year?
I think I'm very proud of the work I've done at Career Services. I've been saying it all year, but Career Services, they needed lots of help with student engagement. And fun fact, now they're just last month they're hiring a new student coordinator, and their entire role is just to engage with students.
Nice.
So it's like Career Services can build their brand, and students can be aware of what they do and the services they provide. And I think that's awesome. So that's a huge win for me.
Well, I think it was so timely that I don't think MRU students make mistakes with their executives. And I always said that I think you were a really good choice because you had such a passion for student employment and student issues around, accessing services to help them find their careers. And so, especially with, talks right now around work integrated learning legislation from the government, Alberta 2030 and so forth, I think the work that you did was right at the most appropriate time. And I think it's really amazing that you've done that work. So right on, Joseph.
Yeah. And on your end, what's your personal highlight?
Yeah, I was really thinking about this as I was coming to record this podcast with you. I think the one I would say is the COVID advocacy. I'm really proud of what I was able to do with the COVID advocacy. I always say, I ran I'm a two-term president. And so the first time I ran was in 2020 in February. And we all know that infamous March 2020 where everything locked down. And so I wasn't anticipating on becoming a pandemic student president, but here we are, and I think we secured so many good things like mandatory webcam use, exam proctoring, trying to get students back in person, but still respecting the safety that students demanded, and we continue to advocate for that for the rest of this term. So I'm really happy with the advocacy that we did around COVID.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me, Joseph. We won't be doing this again.
Yeah, this is the last time.
Maybe this will happen again in the future with future SAMRU rec teams, and I encourage that because it's really important that students are updated on the advocacy matters that affect them most.
Yeah.
So that's all we have time for today's episode. We hope you found value in our podcast, and we look forward to updating you on how your SAMRU rec team is working and representing you to help you succeed.
Yeah, and hopefully, this gets recreated. We can't say until next episode this time, but it's bittersweet endings, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We're Joseph Nguyen, and we're Spirit River Strike Folk, and Hopefully see you
Signing
around.
off.
Signing off.